Hi, this is Dr. Rutledge, and I'll be talking today about the mini gastric bypass and talking about the bypass limb length and outcomes. So let me start my screen here. Okay, I only have 10 minutes for this presentation, and so if I talk a little fast, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm just measuring the time of the presentation. So we're going to talk about these graphs here and tailored BP limb length, and now we have 10-year data from Dr. Kular, which we'll talk about, and so we'll get started with that now. I'm reminded of a quote: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to remain silent," and my suspicion is that I don't think this was ever said by Donald Trump. We're going to talk about the mini gastric bypass. It's taking off, and what we'd like to say is we're happy that it's becoming more popular, but we'd also like it to be done well, and we've seen some problems with that. Here's kind of an example from Medline: the exponential rise in the number of papers reported yearly on the MGB. So we're going to talk about the tailored bypass and some of its outcomes. Just to remind people, it's been part of the MGB from the beginning, and there's a lot of confusion about that. Essentially, one of the unique and controversial portions of the MGB is the tailored BP limb length. It's a simple application of basic general surgery and animal experiments, which clearly shows that the length of excluded bowel, as it increases, the effects increase proportionately. There's numerous references on that, and we'll talk about Dr. Starzl's paper on this topic in a minute. It's surprising to me that the bariatric community still has trouble understanding this basic rule of both physiology, animal, and general surgery studies. But the creation of the MGB is simply an extension of these basic general surgery and GI surgery studies. So why are we here? We're here to teach something really simple. If you bypass more, you lose more weight. That's all. So guess what? This is not new. It's been something I've been saying for years, but not everybody gets it. So here's an example. This is 15 years ago at the SAGES meeting in the United States. And basically we were looking at our 1-year weight loss in my MGB patients. And we could see that as the pre-op weight went up, we tend to bypass more gut. But as they went up, we also found that there was an increase in total reported 1-year weight loss. And that was statistically significant. But I've been talking about this for 20 some years, and still people can't quite understand it or agree with it. As an example of still people having trouble with this, we had 20 authors on a recent paper submitted to Obesity Surgery and then to International Journal of Surgery, and many of these people are quite internationally famous. It was tailored BP limb length and weight loss after a 1 anastomosis gastric bypass, the mini gastric bypass using the original technique with 10-year follow-up. And this was based on Dr. Kular's patients here in India. We concluded, amongst other things, that a longer bypass had a direct linear increase in weight loss as measured by % excess weight loss and other measures, and it was rejected. And here's some of the editorial comments, like it says it adds nothing new, even though people are still arguing about it. He says it's not an MGB because Rutledge did not say tailored bypass in his first paper. That's true because I didn't tell every single step in doing it, and reading a 1-paragraph description of the MGB doesn't make you an MGB surgeon. Also, they mentioned the references were in wrong place and there was some grammatical errors. But in short, what we're going to show you here is that the longer bypass has a linear increase in weight loss, but not just weight loss. We'll talk about diabetes and diet and other things. And for my sake, I would say it's a little challenging constantly arguing with the tanks of the world of bariatric surgery, but we'll keep fighting. So what we want to say is the MGB is really unique in that it has the ability, amongst other things, to tailor the treatment power to thin, overweight, obese, and super obese patients. And that's pretty exciting. So unfortunately, we found that some surgeons, when they adopt the MGB, do it without education or training. And so we're actually creating a training course and certification for MGB because we'd like to cut down on the deaths and complications when surgeons who really haven't been trained in performing it do a bad or a poor version of the MGB. So again, Many benefits, but number one that we're talking about today is the tailored BP limb length. Here's another example. This is from some 15 years ago also. The tailored to the patient has been something that's been with the MGB since the beginning. Here's a study by Dr. Tom Starzl, and for those of you who don't know, Dr. Starzl is a very famous general surgeon. He is one of the leaders in developing liver transplant, and he did a study in animals looking at the amount of the gut is bypassed in a Billroth 2, that's like the MGB. And he bypassed either 10, 25, or 35% of the small bowel, the small intestine. And what he found was what we found and what we know from other studies in animals and people, that if you bypass a little, there's not much of an effect. If you bypass a medium amount, which is what the MGB does, there's a slight fatty food intolerance, and that varies, but that's what we see in the MGB. And if you bypass more, you can get major inability to handle regular and fatty foods in particular. And they concluded there's a direct and I'd say linear relationship between BP limb length and all of the measured outcomes. And this has been seen over and over again. And since my time is limited, I'm going to go on, but we could show you many other articles. This is our recent study on BP limb length and 10-year weight loss from Dr. Kular. And basically, we're going to show you some short answers, but basically, the slightly increased risk of excess weight loss means that this operation is not for beginners. What we found in Dr. Kular's study, the BP limb was on average about 2 meters, with some shorter and some longer. The pre-op weight was about 127 kilos. The weight loss was around 50 kilos, and the ending weight was 78 kilos, which is pretty good with a normal average human around 70 kilos. So that's pretty good. We can show you also here that basically heavier patients were chosen to have a longer BP limb. And that's true in how we recommend it. Now, what we can show you here is as the BP limb length went up, people lost more weight. Okay, that's what we said. And a lot of people are confused about that, but it's true. And here's what happens at the end of the 10-year study, which is that people all cluster around this almost ideal body weight around 70. Now, there's scatter, but the mean of the weight is very close to a normal person. So that's really good results. So here would be perfect. And what we see is we're not perfect, but because of the scatter, we choose to be a little short of perfect. And so this is maybe as good as possible. Again, here is the BP limb length here, and here's percent excess weight loss, and you can see they're tightly correlated. So percent excess weight loss is directly and linearly related to the BP limb length. Longer bypass limb, more weight loss. A lot of people don't understand that, but it's true. Now here's diabetes. This is a study of Dr. Kular's patients, 113 diabetics. Mean hemoglobin A1C after 10 years had gone down from 9 to just below 6. And of the 89 patients at 10 years, 98.9 or 99% had hemoglobin A1Cs less than 7%, a good measure of how good the treatment is. So it was excellent. And again, BP limb length was strongly correlated to the change, the delta in hemoglobin A1C. So let's look at that graphically. If we calculate the hemoglobin A1C on the day of surgery and subtract it from 10 years later, what we can find is the longer the BP limb, the more there is a drop in the hemoglobin A1C. What this means is you can titrate, you can adjust the MGB depending on the severity of the diabetes, if you wish, all other things being equal. So it means that essentially we can tailor the MGB to the patient. It's not like a sleeve. Everybody gets a sleeve is a sleeve is a sleeve or a Roux-en-Y. MGB can be tailored. And this is something similar. It shows that linear relationship as BP limb length changes, the delta, how much you bring down the hemoglobin A1C changes. But the reason that's interesting is there's a new, very expensive class of drugs called GLP-1, and GLP-1 drugs only drop the hemoglobin A1C in the overall group by about 1.4 points, whereas the MGB is tailorable. So if you have somebody who has a very high hemoglobin A1C, the very expensive lifetime drugs, linear GLP-1, is unlikely to be curative, whereas in many cases, the MGB can be very much more powerful. This is my data, just to show you real quickly. I did a survey and I asked people their BP limb length, their weight loss, their food choices, particularly junk foods, sugary drinks, fatty foods, meat, as well as healthy foods. And what we found is that the BP limb length tailored by Dr. Rutledge, me, is directly related to patient-reported weight loss, so R squared of 0.93. And it's also interestingly related to the change in the number of fatty food or meat or bad foods that they eat per day. So let's look at that. Here's the BP limb length in feet. And so the longer the BP limb length, the bigger the weight loss. Okay, so we lose more weight if we bypass more. On top of that, if we look at how much junk food they eat, and we call it bad food choices, per year, the patients who are heavier have eaten way more junk food per year when they come to see me. Okay, that's not surprising, but it shows probably the survey is pretty accurate. Now, if we look post-op, the longer the BP limb length, that's across here, the longer that is, the more they decrease the number of bad food choices per day. So a longer BP limb means almost 5 fewer choices of junk food during the day. And then multiply that by 365 days per year, that's a lot less junk food. This is the same thing. So longer bypass, bigger decline in total bad food choices per day. Okay, that's my 10 minutes. I've actually gone 11 minutes, so sorry. But in short, I would summarize the presentation by saying the following. All animal general surgery studies show that a strong, consistent relation between the length of bowel bypassed and outcomes. Okay, that's not just me. Rutledge, Coular, and others have shown that BP limb length is directly and linear related to weight loss, hemoglobin A1C levels, post-op dietary changes, and more. And so I'll finish with asking, when will the bariatric community acknowledge the obvious? And if you're a patient, maybe you want to find a surgeon who understands this before you choose your operation. Thanks very much, and have a nice day.